Despite the fifth and final season finishing in January, later in 2006 we got one final Teen Titans movie to wrap up the series. Without any further ado, a review of Teen Titans Trouble in Tokyo. After a battle with a high-tech villain named Psychotech, the Teen Titans travel to the city of Tokyo where they find themselves embroiled in a conflict with an ancient enemy. So to begin with the beginning of the movie, it's really sick. Seeing Psychotech nearly murder some people before it pans to the Titans is a pretty great opener. While the fight itself borders on being bland, some moments like Robin saving Star and him showing his knowledge of the town are pretty enjoyable. Back at the tower, the interrogation doesn't really match the twist that they try to do at the end of the movie, but it's a nice callback to Robin's obsession with stopping crime. While we have already had 4 episodes about that, it's a major part of Robin's character, and this movie is largely about him and Star. Anyway, the scene where they pack up is really well done. I found myself watching it a few times just because of how fluid it is. While the scene where they travel to Tokyo is kind of boring, once they actually get there, they almost immediately get into a fight with a huge dragon, and they get destroyed. It's not really like they get beat in a fun or interesting way, they just kind of mess up. This is where you meet Daizo, the most obvious hidden villain imaginable. Seriously, just imagine the most cliche imaginable, man in power turns out to be bad, and that's Daizo. It's not a super great part of the plot, it just kind of drags the movie every time he shows up. 4 of the Titans just accept that since Broshigun is also the name of an urban legend according to one guy, that they should just accept that their house being wrecked was a prank or something. Anyway, the plot kind of just stops for a second so we can watch Starfire play some off-brand of DDR and Raven chew gum. Following that scene, we get the first of Starfire and Robin's relationship scenes. While I am glad they decided to wrap up one of the loose ends of the main series, only having it being this one is a bit disappointing. Don't get me wrong though, I do enjoy that they chose to finally confirm their relationship, although it is relatively solely talked about in 3 scenes. This scene is also where the animation decline first starts to show. Unlike most movies made after a cartoon, this movie looks worse than the actual show. But I digress, as the dialogue during these scenes are definitely the best in the movie, as the dialogue during the fight scenes are minimal, and the jokes are, well, we'll get to them later. The scenes get progressively better, so I'll talk more about them as we get to them. Then we get to the 2 worst parts of the movie, the Japanese girl's plot and the chef's plot. Starting with the chef plot, it's incredibly useless and unfunny and just a bore to sit through. The Japanese girl plot is similar in that way, but extra bad because this comes right after things change, so you would imagine that Beast Boy would still be affected by Terra, but nope, he just chases after random girls. These subplots get even worse later, but first we get the best fight of the movie, Psychotech versus Robin. This fight is pretty good, as the colors in the background do a great job showcasing just how fast this fight is. It's a bit short, but the ending with Robin seemingly punching him to death is a great end. Starfire has a nice conversation with a child, which is just barely short enough to not get boring, and each Titan besides Robin gets to fight an ink monster. These fights are a bit disappointing. They had the ability to design these creatures pretty much however they wanted, and they decided to make a pretty standard fight anyway. Back to Robin. Inserting a plot about the morality of taking a life in the middle of a movie is a bit weird, but they move past that relatively quickly as we get to the best part of the movie. There is a fantastic scene with Robin taking the clothes off a mugger and then wreaking havoc in a dive bar. It's not a great fight in the bar or anything, but the tone and atmosphere of it is fantastic. The collection of great scenes continues as we get a motorcycle chase that is incredibly fun to watch. That ends with Starfire saving Robin, and then we get another great scene between them, and then we get the backstory of Broshigun. While I did criticize this movie's animation before, I love this scene, as the artist's transformation into a monster is done fantastically, and Raven's storytelling is actually great for the scene. After this scene, I was convinced that the movie could carry this momentum until the end, but unfortunately, it just goes downhill from here. The next scene is just a huge slap in the face with a more serious tone. I mean, seriously, how do you go from a backstory about an artist becoming a monster and his flesh becoming paper to a wacky chase scene where Japanese girls and chefs team up with the police? I'll talk more about this movie's attempted fusion of comedy and action later, but first, let's go through the end of the movie and the end of Teen Titans as a whole. The final fight being at the comic book factory is a neat idea, but the execution of the general being behind it all was a bit lacking. The first half of the fight is pretty short, but the giant ink creature does lead to a pretty climactic final fight though, with multiple copies of each monster that they fought before. Broshigun being so weak and longing for death is surprisingly dark for this movie, and I think they wrote him pretty well. The fight itself also has some pretty cool shots, but it is a bit disjointed. Unfortunately, they end this fight in the lamest way possible. Right after an admittedly great shot with Beast Boy looking hopelessly up, Robin just comes out of the creature with Butcher Gun with no fanfare. Butcher Gun dies, and we get the third and final scene in the Starfire and Robin saga. It's definitely a bit weak dialogue-wise, but the rain makes it pretty cinematic and definitely a nice way to end the Robin-Star relationship. Then we get the actual last scene where they wrap up everyone else's arc in a nice way. And that's the movie. The idea of having the movie take place largely away from Jump City is unfortunate, especially since that was the whole point of Season 5. Also, besides slight Silky and Aqualad cameos, only the main 5 Titans return, which makes it not really feel like a finale. The animation looks worse, and their joke rating is lower than the series standard, although it had already taken a bit of a dip in Season 5. Speaking of the comedy, it's clear they didn't want to do a completely serious action-packed movie like Aftershock or Apprentice, nor a completely wacky episode like Control Freak or Mad Mon's episodes. So instead, they kind of switched between the two, which kind of works at the beginning, but towards the end when they do the chase scene that's in every wacky episode, it destroys the pacing. Another issue I have with this movie is the lack of a theme. While the Starfire and Robin scenes would lead you to believe that the theme is that even heroes need breaks and that they're more than their job, that's kinda unrelated from the main threat. Speaking of Star and Robin, the only purpose this movie seems to serve to the main series is that it finally has them come together. It's fine. I would have liked to see them in more scenes that aren't directly about their love, but most of the Butcher Gun stuff is handled by just Robin. Speaking of which, the plot seems cool at times, but falls flat on its face every time Daiso shows up. He's just characterless, and the twist that he's bad is barely a twist. The Butcher Gun backstory is still the highlight of the film, and the scenes before that when Robin goes solo are also great. But around all of that is Cyborg and Beast Boy getting chased by chefs and schoolgirls, and a completely disjointed plot. The slightly above average action somehow saves this movie, as does the moment of greatness in the middle. The biggest compliment I can give this movie, however, is that its existence makes the main series better. And with that, I will give it a 6 out of 10, although I was very close to a 5. Well, that's about it. Next video will be a series overview where I rank my favorite episodes from the show and rank the seasons. I'll also talk a bit more about the movie there too. Anyway, this has been AmpleSamuel, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.